So I've been doing these videos for about almost going on 5 months now. I've also started to get a little bit active on social media, mainly Twitter, but a bit on Facebook as well. Taking some steps here, obviously something that I'm interested in. Probably the thing I'm most excited about though is planning on starting to do, I guess, a podcast is what we would call it, with my brother, who I work through a lot of this stuff with. And we're going to start that probably this week. So figured I'd talk about that a little bit, why I'm excited about it, what I think the objective of it is, and what I hope for it. So for starters, the way I've been explaining it to people to this point is it'll be an interview type format, more or less a long form style interview, maybe an hour and 30 minutes. And the idea is to interview really anybody. Could be family, friends, colleagues, classmates, ex-classmates, really anybody, interesting people that we come across. And the idea is to try and just understand their story, right? What's the logic behind how they think, what makes them tick, what do they care about, and why, right? That's kind of how I've been positioning it to people. But if I really think about it, and I was talking to my brother about this today, what it is, or at least what I'd like it to be, is a journey, kind of a path that we take people on in that 60 or 90 minutes to ideally better understand themselves in some ways. And the reason why I think that's the objective, and why I think hopefully we're well suited to deliver on that objective is, I've spent really the last almost 7 years going on now trying to refine the way that we think and understand how our minds work, understand the flaws, the biases, the blind spots, understand the dynamics of the different aspects of thinking, the more automated thinking, the deeper analytical thinking, understanding what motivates people, thinking really philosophically about logic and how we develop values and certainties and viewpoints, principles to use when trying to think better, as I'll often refer to it. So a lot of heavy lifting in terms of that, but probably most importantly is the inward facing use of that, the self-reflection, the looking inward and trying to understand better how we tick, what's our story, what's our logic behind, what makes us do what we do, and questioning that and challenging that, not just for the sake of it, but to try and think better, to try and be better people. And it's a journey, and it takes probably all life, your entire life, and there's probably no finish line in it, but you're consistently striving to get better perspective, search for some form of objective truth, and continue to improve as a person. And that's probably the piece of it that I think really started to change things, for me at least. It's one thing to academically understand, how people think, how the minds work, even to start to get a bit philosophical and start to think about what does it mean to really think, what does it mean to really have views and ego and identity and all those things. But when you start to be able to prove it out or work through it for yourself and see some results, and real results, right? Results that are hard-earned. I've talked a lot about mental toughness being perhaps one of the most important traits in this process. It's hard, getting in the mud, really challenging yourself, discovering and identifying inconvenient truths. These are things that are super difficult and they take a lot of time, but you start to see the impact of it. I think once you start to get an understanding for that, that's where the value really comes from. You start to appreciate, how do you go down that path? How do you really start to understand yourself better? And how do you do it in a way in which you can stay humble, stay open-minded, not let your emotions take over, not let the natural inclinations of the mind to put up barriers and defense mechanisms and all those things. How do you navigate that? It's a tricky task, and as I said, I by no means think I or we are masters of that, but I think there's some progress that's been made on it. and the ability to communicate and help people down that path, understanding the pitfalls, understanding the importance of empathy to really understand that person's perspective and know where the sensitive areas are, where the pitfalls are, where you need to pull back, where you might need to push further, how to question in such a way where it doesn't sweep somebody's legs out and make them feel like this is just torture. Those are hard things to do. And this part of the process, starting to do these podcasts, starting to really have in-depth conversations with people is meant to be, as all of it is meant to be, it's a learning. It's something that hopefully a year from now, we look back on and say, wow, we really didn't fully understand it then, but now we get it better. And then a year after that, same thing, because that's the goal. And the only way you can do it is by having these conversations, by bringing it to bear. So that's super exciting to me to start to do that. And there's also, there's a benefit for us, obviously, to learn and to better understand and get better perspective on other people and how people think, which is also valuable, right? As you think about the philosophy and the thinking around that, you have to see more. You have to see, I've said it a bunch, right? Going external and just getting more perspective, understanding different methodologies, frameworks, approaches, things that underlie how people function. You can only get so much of that internally. You have to get outside perspectives. You have to truly challenge your thinking. So this will help do that as well. And I guess the ultimate premise of this ties to a principle that I've talked about before, the base level, I guess, which is that, the belief that logic is a universal principle. The belief that everything we do as humans, aside from a mental illness, which I always caveat with, there is a reason, there is a logic, there is a mathematical equation, a calculation that's happening in our heads every time we develop a view, take an action, make a decision, make a statement. There is a logic behind that. We don't always understand that logic, right? At a surface level, we don't always like that logic. We don't always like the truths that sit behind it. It may make us uncomfortable. It may be something we wish we didn't believe. It may be something that a day, a week, a month later, we totally change our views on. But in that moment, there's always a logic. There's always a logic behind it. And in many ways, the goal of these podcasts is to go down that path to figure out what that logic is on whatever the relevant topics are. It could be political views, it could be religious, spiritual views, it could be just, overall views on life or careers, or really whatever it is that person is interested in and passionate about, family, friends, marriage, whatever it is. Trying to go down that path of understanding what's the why, but not just the first level why, the second, the third, the fourth level why. What really is that deep logic behind how people tick? And hopefully that brings some value to people. Hopefully it's interesting for people listening because they get to see this modeled a little bit and they get to see how it plays and how you do that really deep self-reflection. Hopefully it's interesting for the interviewee and they get some takeaways from it and they feel like there's benefit and they understand themselves better. And hopefully there's benefit for us in learning and understanding how people think and us getting better and smarter and realizing what we don't know. So hopefully the benefits, abound across the board, but something that I'm super excited to start doing.